Thank you, and thank you, Christina, for that introduction. Good evening to all of you, and I'm so happy to see so many of you here tonight in what I'm sure will be a fascinating discussion with Elle. As you heard, I've been a longtime admirer of and commentator on Elle's work, so it's a real privilege for me to be here with you and him tonight. I'm going to ask him to join me on the stage in just a few minutes, but first I thought I might provide you with a very brief introduction to his innovative practice and his conceptual brilliance, evident to many of his admirers, students, and colleagues over the last 40-odd years, but only recently accessible to the broader contemporary art world. And after that, we'll be showing you a very short film clip of his studio process. So Elle was born in Ghana in 1934 into a family of practiced weavers. He attended a mission school as a child and then continued on to train as an artist at Kumasi University of Science and Technology, one of the oldest and most distinguished art schools on the continent, which was affiliated at the time with Goldsmiths College in London. But his education wouldn't end within the academy's walls. Rather, it would be furthered by his intense study of and dedication to the aesthetics of indigenous art practices, the sensibilities of which have subtly continued to inform his practices. He held a teaching position at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka for over 3 decades until his retirement in 2001, benefiting from the fervent intellectual debates that characterized the post-independence era in Nigeria and training a whole generation of talented students, many of whom now have their own careers. Anatsui has worked with diverse materials throughout his career: clay, wood, paper, metals, and as we will hear tonight, he has built a complex and considered approach to his process. He has continually addressed processes of transformation, regeneration, and reclamation in his work. His deep affection for and commitment to the inherent qualities of his materials are evident throughout his repertoire. And he has stated on more than one occasion that he is drawn to materials that, quote, are thrown up by the environment, unquote, and which lead him in his process. The interest in non-fixed form, performance, and chance has long been part of this practice, in which other hands can rearrange the elements, fragments, or pieces of a whole, and meaning can constantly be transformed by a curator's or a collector's hand. The playfulness that informs his process is countered by the weight of historical residences that run through many of his masterpieces, hinting at larger narratives of hardship and human struggle, labor and resistance. Anatsui's clear enjoyment of and willingness to pursue diverse visual manners and materials has led to an impressive intermedia practice. So in his hands, wood or metal might resemble stamped cloth or strip-woven textiles. Sculptures have a performative or kinetic presence, and clay pots become not containers, but sculpted chambers of memory. So it is my hope that in this evening's conversation, we will touch on these and a number of other important issues to give you a glimpse into the workings of his creative genius. So please enjoy this short film clip.
The studio is located in the university town of Nsukka in southeastern Nigeria. It's about 10-20 minutes by walking north of the university campus. There are times that I come in unexpectedly, and I'll park my car elsewhere and walk in, and you hear there's a lot of, how do you call it now, banter. Yeah, very loud banter. And when I go in, then they all keep quiet. Yeah, because I always demand that there should be absolute silence, or as much silence as possible. Because I try to impress upon them that a studio is a sacred place that you come to do some bit of reflection and thinking. pattern or texture that I'm introducing. I have to show them how it's done. Because I find that as an artist, if you don't maintain physical contact with handling the material, for instance, the work might end up not having a soul. Okay, so silver on the line there. Silver on the line there. First of all, they have to do the units. We call them blocks. And a block can consist of maybe 200 and something bottle caps together, you know. And so you take these units and then start playing around with them. Then that's when you now have to lay all of them out, scatter them in the studio, and then start picking what you need for each portion of the work. They put them together in a bunch and you try to see what it can suggest. Okay, we will rearrange into blocks. Starting from there, if it's something that you feel it's interesting or something effective, then you have started a new idea. You just play around, shift around, and at times for days you can just keep shifting things around and taking photographs of them and putting them on the computer. And so I have a lot of images on my computer. In course of time, I could go back and just keep looking at this. You need to have a large bank of images, of effects, of textures, you know, that I can always refer to, and they could trigger off new ideas. Because ideas do come at very unusual times.
So if you could please join me in welcoming Anatsui. So I think we're going to begin this evening with some of the first works that you made within the exhibition. Why is this not? Why is it not showing? Can we get the visuals? We're going to talk, Al, we'll give them a second to put that up here, about these sculptures and the wooden trays that you made in Winneba. The earliest works that we have in this exhibition. Can you talk a little bit about, I'm interested in the kinds of processes that you were involved with at the time, bringing other people to work in the process with you. Can you talk a little bit about how these pieces came about?
Well, the idea of working with people, you know, I think I got it out of the model that has been practiced age-long. You know, in architecture, for instance, the architect is the author of a design, but is not the only one who sees to the realization of it. And so, as an artist too, I thought I should work with that kind of model. So, my first pieces of work that I did immediately after art school, pieces in which I think that I started working as an artist, because in art school you're not actually doing artwork, you are doing exercises that are given you in order to develop you, you know. Yeah, and when I left art school, I went into the market where I was living, and I was looking for maybe ideas or objects or things that could set off my practice. Because I've always believed that as an artist, I should work with things which are immediately around me.
And this was in response to having been trained very traditionally, correct? And within the university, you'd been trained in a very sort of British style up until that point?
Yeah, and this was a kind of a reaction to the kind of curriculum that my school ran. School being affiliated to a university in London, with curricula and everything from there, I found was not the right thing, and some of us began looking for our own indigenous sources of inspiration, our own indigenous sources of culture, in order to start us off. And that was when I chanced upon a body of sign writing that I would call them ideograms, which are actually printed on funeral textiles, and each of them would have a particular meaning or saying associated with it. We print of funeral cloths because we believe that a funeral location is one which gives room for reflection about life. Now, so this was what I discovered, and I did study this body of science for quite a time, about 4 or 5 years, trying to go through the motions of creating them, analyzing them, trying to understand their structure and how this relates to their meaning. Although it was a very difficult task, but I did get some understanding, and eventually did create some of my own signs or ideograms as well, which I used alongside these ones. So having come from that kind of line of progression, when I left art school, my idea was, if you want to set up practice, then it has to be something which is based in your own location. So the trays are very common. Everybody knows them in the market. And so they could relate to them even as artworks. They were astonished at the fact that these commonplace trays could become things that they could contemplate upon. And what I did was that since I didn't know how to carve the trays, I had to look for the carvers who produced them, and then I'll go and spend days with them, trying to guide them to they would normally produce the round, this thing, but I would design something, away from that shape, and have them produce this for me, and then I'll bring this home and then intervene by printing or stamping with hot rod these signs in them. As a way, on the textiles, they are put in a cluster. But then, in my way of intervening with them, I would isolate one, because I want to give prominence to the idea behind it.
So even at this early stage, you were beginning to work collaboratively, or work with others would produce parts or be involved in parts of the process, and then you would take it from there. I mean, do you see there being connections between this kind of early work with other carvers and other sets of practices and what you have now created in your workshop in Nsukka?
I didn't get the question right.
Is there so that this really early practice of working with other carvers and working together with other artists is something that began in the 1970s and seems to have followed you through up until the metalworks.
Yeah, the model is one which has followed me through my career so far.
Can you talk a little bit about the importance of many hands in the work?
Yeah, the importance of many hands means that the artist has less load taken, more load taken of him, so that his role is more that of a generator of ideas, a generator and a conductor of ideas, and not necessarily the maker of. When I was in art school, I was a Puritanist, in thinking about the creation of art. I thought that the artist should be the one who generates the idea, he should be the one whose hands do it. But early in my career, I discovered that no, that wasn't the right model, and that has followed me through, even in stamping the pieces of tray, I would have my students come. Large numbers of them would come to my house, which was then a studio, and help me with that. And I think that model has carried on to what I do now, where I have about 30 or so assistants, working together on a piece.
I want to pick up a little bit on what you were talking about in terms of playing with graphic symbols, creating your own language, and playing with the traditions that were around you.
Yeah.
I think it would be fair to say that that kind of emphasis on graphics, on language, is also something that has been important throughout your practice. I'm just wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about, I'm showing here the piece that the exhibition is named after. Maybe with this piece and the unfolding scroll of history, which I can put up as well, you could talk a little bit about your interest in Adinkra, in Nsibidi, Uli, and so forth. Just give us a little insight into your interest in those languages and the mark making.
I think it is more like a life story. I was brought up by an uncle. We lived in a mission house. Therefore, we were secluded from local culture. So from the mission house, I schooled and went to art school. And in art school, we weren't exposed to local culture. So I was completely removed from local culture. So when I chanced upon these examples of local ways of doing art or local art forms, I was really taken in, and I think that I chanced upon this immediately after we've dealt with the Renaissance in Europe. And the Renaissance was more about verisimilitude and such things, and it was, I think, art which was more retinal than, conceptual. And so when I saw these signs, I thought they were more art that you approach with the brain in mind, not just with the eyes, and that has been a guiding principle in my work ethics or my aesthetics, so far. And what was the other part of the question?
You're answering my question, but I wondered also, so for instance, the system of Adinkra signs that you may have.
Yeah, and the Adinkra signs, and not only the signs that I learned in Ghana, but when I came to Nigeria, I saw they have ways of communication which also use signs, and they could animate, the aesthetic was such that they could animate a huge space with just a single line, give complete life to that space. And got to know about Nsibidi signs, which were also a communicating device in a part of Nigeria as well. Later on, I saw a book in which an author was trying to expose all the various forms of communicative, signs that you find out. There are more ideograms than alphabets, you know. And I took interest in all this because I have earlier on either heard or read somewhere that it claimed that Africa didn't have writing traditions, or we didn't have ways of documenting things or of communicating apart from oral. You know, so that made me very interested in these signs and ideograms, and you know, that were part of the continent and therefore part of my culture. Not only the signs, but then later on I saw that in my language, you know, there was this facility whereby, or maybe a challenge, whereby they don't tone mark the words. It's a highly tonal language. You can have a word which spells the same alphabet, but could have up to 5, 6 meanings, you know, depending on the rise and fall of, you know, of the words, or the inflection, you know. And I thought that this worked very well with my aesthetic ideas, because I believe that artworks are things that should have flexible meaning. They should be things that are fixed, you know. So I started using my language as titles for most of my works. Now, this, the work, which is the title of the retrospective, when I last wrote to you, was composed about the time that I discovered this book, and after I've learned about the Nsukka and all these things. And in order to celebrate them, I composed this letter, you know, which almost a poem, you know, a short poem that was meant to be my contribution to, you know, the knowledge about Africa.
Can we talk a little bit about the use of chainsaw, and also the process of charring some of these wooden pieces, this period of time when you begin to work with the chainsaw? What was that like, and how did that come about? And how did you combine the chainsaw with the charring process?
Yeah, a chainsaw that I worked with in the 80s and mostly in the 80s and then part of the 90s. You know, I discovered this tool at a residency somewhere in Massachusetts. Well, not that I hadn't worked with chainsaw before then. I'd used chainsaws just to log wood, simple, you know. But at this residency, I had a chainsaw and I was trying to work with wood. With it, I had logged it from the bushes and brought it in, and was trying to clean it up. And I saw that the tool was making a very peculiar line. So I said, "Well, this line could have great expressive possibilities." You know, and I subsequently tried to learn more about it, learn about the language of the chainsaw, you know, which was very fast, rough, and it had great limitations. You know, it doesn't have time to think about any details. It just goes roughshod over this thing and makes very evocative lines. And I thought that those lines, you know, could relate to certain incidents in the history of my continent, like that one of colonization, whereby some powers came and had to draw lines. You know, the ease with which the lines were drawn. The chainsaw makes only straight lines. That's the most effective line you can make. And you look at the contours or the outlines of countries in my part of the world. There are some which are very straight, you know, lines, like, you know, there was no thought given to anything that could help develop an organic line. You know, so I worked with the chainsaw with that in mind.
And the charring process.
And the charring was, well, the chainsaw makes very rough, woolly edges. So I thought that the idea of charring was to clean up these edges, but then it had another conceptual meaning as well. The charring gives unity to the various colors of wood that are used, because the wood that I've used comes in so many colors, from black through the reds, through the yellows, the browns, to white. And I would compose work with almost all of these, or several of these. And you needed something that would bring them together, that would give unity to them, and the charring imposes that on them. It kind of unifies the whole design, which would have been looking disparate with different colors not related to each other.
I want to move on to something a little different here, forward to some of the pieces that you made just a couple of years ago, with a question about scale. So I think a lot of people here tonight will think about the monumental scale at which you have made many of the more recent works. But of course, you've also made much smaller works that have been very evocative as a result of their scale. And I was wondering if you could talk just maybe a little bit about the importance of scale in your work.
Well, I use scale as a kind of, inflective quality, or inflective element, in my work. The scale could have some contribution to, say, like Visa Q. There was a work I did which had figures as tall as this
I have
and
it
lined up.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And anybody who's been in a Visa queue would understand what the scale used here would mean, because in a Visa queue, everybody's reduced to a very small size. No matter how big or important you think you are in a Visa queue, you are a very small thing. You are somebody who is looking for, maybe a greener pasture or something like that, and that belittles you or diminishes you, And working with, say, the bottle caps, for instance, these are objects that are more or less thrown away, and I want to give them to give them some value. And size is one of the things that one can use to do that with this kind of media. And because they are so small, they need to have numbers in order to make an impact.
While we're on these images of the Sonsbeek procession, I wonder if we can talk a little bit about the performative aspect of these large works. What did it mean to you to be involved in a process like this, where all the townspeople were engaged in the sort of process of revealing the work, and then, of course, later on we see you laying out.
What I think this procession did for the artworks that were shown in a project somewhere in the Netherlands 3 years ago, was that it involved people who otherwise would not have had interest in art. So in a way, it brought people closer to art. Art, actually, at its beginning, was something that was part of life. It wasn't something that you isolated and exhibited only in museums and galleries. It was part of life. And the whole idea behind this was to now involve people in this as a ritual. As a ritual that they participate in. And I had this group that carried my work throughout the city. And after that, we met, and I could see that they had developed interest in art, and were asking very interesting questions, about the work.
And how long were these towels laid to dry on this massive bush here? How long did they stay there?
Oh, they were exhibited for about, I think, 4 or 5 months. Oh. Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to ask about this question of chance and sort of free play in your work. Mm-hmm. This idea that things can continually change, meaning can continually change. Mm-hmm. And maybe I have up here Akua's surviving children. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about this idea of how you find materials, how materials find you, and you begin to make these pieces, maybe with a story of this piece in particular?
Yeah, I think I take this as an example. You know, I was invited to Denmark some years ago to do a work in reaction to the abolition of slavery, 200 years of abolition of slavery. Denmark did its slavery project only in the Gold Coast, which is present-day Ghana, my country. And so they looked for an artist from there to come do a residency and produce work in reaction to that event. And I went there, and for a week or over a week, about 10 days, we were going around looking for a space that I could work in. And they took me to a school which had an art section, and they had studios. And it didn't quite click, And finally, my host and I were eating somewhere, and somebody joined us, and the host told the fellow how we were finding it difficult to get a place for me to work. It wasn't that there were places, but they didn't just appeal to me. I didn't think that they had any meaning to what I went to do or what I was invited to do. So this fellow, after hearing the difficulty in finding a location, asked my host, "Have you taken him to the hammer mill?" So following day, we went to hammer mill. The hammer mill is a forge, in which they have very heavy hammers, cane and other things, which were turned into rum and sugar and other things, and sent to Europe, and some brought back to Africa. So that the link between the three continents, or the three people, I think is what I'm trying to work with, to reference with these bottle cap works.
I guess the question about globalization was coming also from some writings I have about the bottle caps that maybe suggest that they have a kind of look of maps about them, that there's sort of a cartography that's happening that alludes to much of this meaning much of this narrative that you're discussing, that it's almost materialized in the way in which the materials are formed. This kind of narrative of movement.
The process of joining them in a way that they are very free, and it could also have some symbolic or conceptual meaning, referring to the ups and downs in relationships between people of the world, and the idea of also configuring them into something which doesn't have a top, a bottom, or just a map, referring to this idea of floating, floating relationships between humans, peoples, and between continents, or between countries.
I want to skip ahead just so we have some time to talk about some works that maybe people wouldn't be as familiar with, wouldn't have known that you'd worked much in paper, in painting. And maybe if you could talk a little bit about how these practices, these parts of your practice, still inform what you do now? Do you see connections between the print work, the painting, and the large-scale bottle pieces?
Yeah, I think I did some painting, and if I remember right, then it was midway through my working with the wood slabs, I felt like I had to introduce, the wood already had its own color, but I felt like I had to introduce some color. And the colors which came to mind, I remember very well, I did a series of them which referenced the iconic kente cloth that is used, produced in Ghana and in Togo and Ivory Coast, yeah, as well. And but my interest in that iconic listing was because of the color. So when I started working with the bottle caps, for which I did not originate the color, the colors were originated by the people who owned the drinks. Yeah, but I saw that the colors replicate the palette of the same iconic cloth. So it wasn't like I was trying to work producing kente per se, but what I was doing was just to create pieces which are so fluid and so free and so formless that you have to, each time you pick them, you have to give them new form,
So it was almost, one could say it was it's a painterly process in a way, the way you put the colors together and think about the composition of these bottlework pieces. Because you've had...
Yeah, the way I put the colors together, well, initially I was just picking any color. I tell my assistants, just use any color. You mix everything, and no matter how you look at it, you are ending up with the palette of the kente. But now I'm exercising more control over where I put colors, and so you see that I'm getting away from. There's a difference between it and the kente now. I'm thinking more as or grappling with the challenges that a painter, for instance, would be grappling with in his studio or in his work. When I work with these things now, because now I have so many bottle caps, so many colors that I can afford the luxury of picking particular colors and deliberately putting them in certain places.
One of the elements that I mentioned in the introduction that seems to be something that has run through much of your practice is your interest in and sort of honoring of the fragment, the idea of the piece, the broken piece that then becomes part of a whole. And I'm thinking particularly of some of the wonderful Broken Pot series pieces that are in the exhibition. Can you talk a little bit about Chambers of Memory and maybe this idea of the broken and the fragment?
Well, maybe I'll talk about the Broken Pot series. A series that I did. Well, it's just one of the pieces from that series. For about 3-4 years, when I went to Nigeria, I left Ghana and went to Nigeria in 1975, and the first series of works that I did was entitled the Broken Pot series. And I was looking at the idea of the pot, as something which stands for life. And in most parts of Africa, when a pot is broken, for instance, we don't think that it's gone. It's not gone. It's rather passed on to a new dimension, a dimension in which it is more versatile. It's put to more versatile uses than when it was whole. A whole pot might be just a water pot or a grain pot. or a cooking pot, but any of them broken passes on to what I call a spiritual dimension in which it is used for so many other things than when it was whole. And I find that one of the interesting uses that it put to is that it's used as a carrier of sacrifice. You sacrifice to the ancestors. And it's interesting that you used a broken pot, which is a pot which is also dyed, as the vessel to serve him. And this has been something that I have wondered about for a long time. But I treated broken pots as not only symbolic of versatility or passage into a different thing, but as something which gives new life or generates new life. Well, a pot is broken naturally, it can be ground and mixed with fresh clay, and in that way you are transferring the memory, the strength, everything of that broken pot into the new one. And so it's like an affirmation of growth or regeneration. Yeah, affirmation of regeneration. Regeneration which is consequent upon breakdown. You have to break down first and fully before you are regenerated. Just like a seed has to kind of rot a little bit before it sprouts new shoots. So I looked at clay from that point of view and a pot from those 2 points of view, and created this series of works in which I would work with fragments of pots, to create a whole pot, and also
do you want to talk a little bit about how you came about making this piece, The Chambers of Memory?
Oh, The Chambers of Memory was made as a tribute to a certain art form which I saw in Nigeria, which I think I saw it in it was in Detroit. Yeah, I saw the knock terracottas, which when I saw them in Nigeria for the first time, they were so attractive to me that I think they stuck. And I was doing this work. My idea wasn't to work with the knock idea or the knock aesthetic, but the work ended up looking like knock terracottas, which come with a very simple closed form, and very rudimentary features on them, which to me makes me feel that the people who worked on them have very clear understanding of the clay language. Having worked with clay over some period too, I know that this is a clear understanding of clay language that they have displayed. I did this work and entitled it Chambers of Memory, because I think my work has revolved around or taken a lot of inspiration from the history of Africa. I wasn't trying to recall the history or record it or anything, but using it as spark to generate some of my ideas. And at the time, I was reading a lot of poetry from African writers, and I think I saw that quotation or that phrase in the poem of one of them, and it attracted me, and I thought that this work should be geared towards that, the chambers of memory.
I'm going to move ahead to a piece that I have never seen in person, and I have to go and see now that it's up again. It's going to be up in the Brooklyn show, correct?
Yeah.
And I bring it up because it seems like a bit of a departure at the time in 2010, a kind of new way of imagining both how to display and work with the bottle caps, maybe sort of more open work, greater bits of open work, and looks almost like a scrim in the gallery. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the Glee wall and what was happening in the process. How did it shift to become something that a visitor almost feels as though they could walk right through it?
Yeah. Working the bottle caps over some period, I saw that work was always kind of opaque. You couldn't see it through. And at the time, I had finished using the wider pieces of the bottle caps, and then I had only the rings that you normally see at the neck of the, left. And I thought that I should be able to use them. And when I started putting them together, I saw that they created something that you could see through. And at that time, there's a lot of talk about transparency and all these things. And I thought this should be a beautiful way of my working with the idea of transparency. And also, I thought that working like both sculptor and painter, I should be able to create all the effects that one can get with the regular painting media, oil colors and acrylic colors, which are opaque, and then watercolors, which are transparent, And I saw that with these rings, I could create something that was open. And thinking about transparency brought to me the idea that I have worked with earlier on something else, the idea of the wall, and so I entitled this Glee, which means wall. And to me, the wall is normally a human construct which is meant to block your view or sequester you or close you away from this thing. But in reality, when a wall materializes, it might block your view visually, but not in other ways. Your imagination, for instance, would leap across the wall and in its your imagination leaps across the wall, and curiosity takes over, and you might be imagining more things behind the wall than are probably there. So I have this feeling that walls are more transparent things than things which block views. They are things which provoke more curiosity, which gets us to see with our imagination rather than our eye, And so I did this work and entitled it Glee, which is wall.
So it's again
but not your usual wall like this.
So it's sort of actually picking up on what you started with, this distinction between just the retinal and the conceptual.
Yeah.
Continues on in
that.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to just briefly talk about site specificity, because you and I were talking about this the other day, that so many of your newer works that maybe more people here would be familiar with take place on a very monumental scale, wrapped on or around buildings. And I wanted to start at least with this piece here, the signatures piece, so that there's some sense that this is not necessarily new to your practice, and also talk to you a little bit about what site specificity means in your practice. Can you?
Yeah, I think site specificity I take it at a very liberal, I give it a very liberal meaning. People think that a site-specific thing would work only in one site, but you take it to another site, it wouldn't work. But what if you followed my trajectory so far, you see that my works cannot be site-specific. They are things which would fit into so many sites. But there have been occasions that I have been challenged with having to work with things on certain sites. And this is one of them. I found this huge collection of wood at a site that we were doing a residency in, and did this work with it. It's called signatures because I take my ideas from so many sources. The spark for that work came from what I've noticed that timber dealers in my part of the world do. When they buy timber, they might consign them together, and so they have to devise ways of identifying each person's timber. So they will put marks at the edges of them. So when you go to the timber market, you see, them arrange these things, and you have these beautiful marks at the end of them. That is their signature, and I thought I should appropriate that and use it for this work. So these works were done in situ, and at the same time, it could go into any other situation and have maybe a slightly different meaning.
And what about the works that are on buildings, the sort of relationship between the work and a real built form?
Yeah, this particular one, which was done in Venice, was on a 12th century building.
Palazzo.
And the theme of the show I was invited to was time. And so when I did this and took it there, I finished it there, give it a nursery context and meaning there by opening it up so that something that I had done a couple of weeks earlier on could relate to this 800-year-old building by inviting parts of the building into itself.
That's the open work in the top there. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
What about the two latest? Some of you may be aware that there's a piece up now on the High Line in New York, which I'll show you in a minute, but it's the second of this series of works that you debuted in Paris, I guess, in 2012, the Brooklyn Bridge. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk a little bit about that piece and how that came about?
I don't know if I can talk much about this piece now, because normally I would wait for some years but when I was invited to work on the aspects that I remember that I considered consciously, what material to use and how it relates to the space that I was given. Now, this is a museum for fashion in Paris, and the frontage of it was what I was asked to interact with. And so I had to think of something which talks about, say, fabric, but not fabric in the very fine sense of it, but fabric which is still referring to human endeavor and human conditions. And then the other medium was that of the mirrors. The mirror is naturally an accessory of anything fashion. So I worked with these two pieces in such a way that I also wanted to invite since the work was in the open, and it was very close to what's the name of their tower? Eiffel Tower.
Eiffel Tower.
Yeah. I wanted to invite it into the work. And so the mirror served to bring in this tower, as one of, and it became part of my work. I wanted to invite an iconic object into the work. At the same time, talk about fashion.
Say you can't talk about that. It's a pretty good explanation. I'm going to just leave us here with the piece of the High Line and wrap up our conversation and move us on to a question and answer period, which is going to take place in the screening room. So I'd like to thank you all very much for coming, and if you want to join us there, please do. Thanks, Al.